where they are, the roles they occupy, the relationships they belong to, and the physical and psychological conditions that shape their daily experience. These identity facts can change without altering anything morally significant. A person becomes married, moves to a new city, or undergoes a shift in mental life, and each of these events alters who they are in a descriptive sense. Yet such changes do not, on their own, transform the person's moral character. Mind states belong to this descriptive identity as well. They include emotions, moods, impulses, and temporary psychological conditions that influence how one acts in particular moments. A person who is ordinarily punctual may arrive late one day because they are exhausted or distracted. The lateness is a fact about them that morning, but it does not mark a change in their character. Likewise, a generally honest student who succumbs to the pressure of a single difficult exam may cheat once, yet this isolated failure does not automatically define them as a dishonest person. These actions are shaped by transient psychological conditions rather than entrenched dispositions. They reflect momentary failures, not a deeper moral orientation. Moral character, by contrast, describes the long-term patterns, aspirations, and cultivated dispositions that define who a person is becoming over time. Character is not made from isolated events, nor from the fluctuating states of the mind, but from the stable tendencies revealed through consistent action. It is the moral architecture of the self, the virtues one builds, the commitments one upholds, the habits one strengthens, and the aspirations one repeatedly returns to even after failure. Whereas identity outlines the structure of a life, character gives that structure moral meaning. It is fundamentally temporal, emerging through continuity, repetition, and the stories individuals form about the kind of person they aim to be. This distinction also clarifies the role of responsibility. While identity lays out the psychological and physical conditions that shape action, character concerns the evaluative standpoint from which actions are interpreted. A single lapse does not overturn the narrative arc of a person's moral life. Instead, it becomes part of a broader trajectory that reveals one's direction of development. In this way, moral character integrates past behavior, present intention, and the shaping of future possibility into a unified moral story. It is the dimension of the self that aspires, reforms, and strives for coherence. These distinctions resonate with the traditions of virtue ethics, in which character, not isolated actions alone, is the primary subject of moral evaluation. Virtue ethics insists that moral excellence arises from stable dispositions cultivated over time. Temporary emotions may influence a person's actions, but only enduring patterns reveal virtue or vice. Identity changes, social roles, and momentary impulses belong to the background conditions of a life, while character reflects the cultivated moral orientation that a person sustains across the fluctuations of circumstance and mind. This framework aligns naturally with the idea that moral growth is a narrative process, a shaping of the self across time through intentional wisdom reflective practice. This model of the self also sits comfortably alongside Freud's tripartite theory of the psyche. Freud describes the personality as shaped by the interactions of the ID, the instinctual drives, the ego, the mediator of reality, and the superego, the internalized moral voice. In this light, mind states can be seen as the shifting expressions of the ID and ego, temporary psychological currents responding to inner impulses or external pressures. Identity, meanwhile, includes the ego's ongoing attempts to navigate reality, maintain coherence, and manage the conditions of life. Moral character aligns most closely with the superego, though not in a purely Freudian sense. Character represents the cultivated moral commitments that stand above momentary impulses, forming a stable structure of aspiration and responsibility. While Freud analyzes how inner forces shape behavior, this account focuses on how individuals shape themselves morally across time. Yet both frameworks affirm that the self is a layered, temporal phenomenon, with moral character representing the highest, most enduring formation of the person. Character is stable disposition. Aristotle versus mind states as passing conditions. Aristotle famously distinguishes between hexis, stable dispositions of character, path, temporary passions, emotions, impulses, or mind states. A moment of anger, fear, anxiety, forgetfulness, or distraction belongs to the psychological identity of the person at that moment, but does not define their moral character. The lateness arose from a pathos, a passing state, not from a hexis, a rooted disposition. Virtue ethics evaluates moral meaning not by snapshot actions, but by patterns across time. Virtue ethics holds that emotions, mind states, must be trained and harmonized, but no single emotion is a virtue or vice, and temporary states do not define moral worth when governed through wisdom. The tripartite, physical existence, the embodied, situated agent, Aristotle, the animal with rational capacities. 2. Mental existence, the fluctuating psychological life, passions, appetites, emotions. 3. Moral existence, character, stable, cultivated dispositions that shape action over time. A comparison with Kantian moral theory. The distinction between identity, mind states, and moral character stands in sharp contrast to the structure of Kantian moral theory. Kant does not begin with the temporal development of the self, nor with the narrative unfolding of stable dispositions. Instead, he grounds morality in pure practical reason, which issues universal laws binding on all rational agents regardless of their psychological conditions or biographical identities, whereas virtue ethics and the account developed here treat character as something that emerges over time through cultivated habits and self-formation. Kant locates the source of moral worth in the will's capacity to legislate moral law out of duty. In Kant's framework, momentary mind states, emotions, impulses, desires, lack moral significance except insofar as they tempt the agent away from duty. They are not part of moral character, but rather part of the phenomenal self, which Kant sees as determined by nature. The moral self, the noumenal agent, is defined by the capacity to act autonomously, independent of contingent psychological states. This differs sharply from the model in which mind states belong to descriptive identity and influence but do not define moral character. For Kant, the will's freedom from these conditions is what makes moral responsibility possible. The agent is assessed not by narrative continuity or by the patterns of a life, but by whether the maxim of a particular action can be willed as universal law. Identity, on this Kantian view, also plays no direct role in moral evaluation. A person may be married, a parent, or hold a particular social position, but such facts do not themselves generate moral worth. The only thing that has intrinsic moral value is the good will. The will that acts from duty is determined by reason. Thus, identity changes such as entering into a new social role are never morally significant on their own. They matter only when they create new duties, such as promises or obligations, not because they transform the person's character. This stands in contrast to approaches that interpret identity roles as narrative structures through which character is expressed and developed. The greatest divergence emerges around the concept of moral character itself. In Kantian theory, character is not primarily about the enduring patterns of a life, but about the principles on which one acts, the maxims one chooses as guiding laws for oneself. A single action performed from the right motive can possess full moral worth, even if it does not yet reflect a stable, cultivated disposition. The temporally extended formation of virtue plays a secondary role. By contrast, the view developed here treats moral character as a narrative formation, a temporal arc of aspiration, stability, habituation, and self-interpretation. Character is what a person becomes through consistent patterns, whereas for Kant character is measured by the purity and universality of the will behind each action. Despite these differences, there is a structural echo across both models. Kant's distinction between the phenomenal self and the noumenal self parallels, in a limited sense, the distinction between descriptive identity and moral character. Just as moral character rises above fluctuating mind states, Kant's autonomous self stands above empirical inclinations. Yet the two frameworks are not mirror images. Kant's noumenal self is not formed in time, and does not grow through narrative processes. It is the standpoint of reason itself. Moral development, for Kant, is not the unfolding of a personal story but the strengthening of the will's ability to act from duty against inclination. This comparison becomes even more illuminating when placed alongside Freud's tripartite psyche. Freud's ID and ego correspond to the psychological and identity-bound aspects of the person, while the superego represents the internalized moral voice. Kant's moral law shares something with the superego in its normative force, yet Kant's morality arises from autonomous rational will, not from internalized authority. In the framework developed here, moral character resembles neither Freud's superego nor Kant's pure reason. Instead, it is a temporal moral narrative, a cultivated structure that integrates aspiration, responsibility, and long-term patterns of conduct. In this light, Kantian morality offers a sharp, decontextualized standard of duty, whereas the account presented here understands the moral self as evolving, embodied, psychologically situated, and narratively formed. Each framework offers a distinct way of interpreting the moral life, Kant through the universality of reason, and this account through the temporal formation of character within the ongoing story of a life.